loser.
Mom, look! I've caught a butterfly.
Great job, son.
Welcome to Luxurious Tales. If you love powerful stories, don't forget to like, share, and comment.
Please subscribe to our channel.
Yes, please subscribe. We would really appreciate your support.
Thank you.
The snow fell in steady, graceful sheets over Burlington, Vermont, coating the streets in white silence as volunteers prepared for the annual Winter Hope Marathon. Rebecca Hale stood near the registration booth, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a wool cap pulled low over her dark hair. She had always loved this event, not because of spectacle, but because it funded prenatal care programs for underinsured mothers. Her father, Thomas Hale, a retired firefighter with a firm sense of right and wrong, had taught her that service defined character. Her mother, Judith, once a nurse, often reminded her that compassion saved more lives than medicine alone. Rebecca moved through the crowd with warm efficiency, checking in runners, offering encouragement, her breath forming soft clouds in the freezing air. That morning, Andrew Cole arrived not as a runner, but as the event's principal sponsor. Tall, sharply dressed even in winter boots and a tailored overcoat, Andrew carried himself like a man determined never to be overlooked again. Having grown up in Detroit under the shadow of poverty and a gambling father who vanished without apology, Andrew had vowed to build wealth that insulated him from humiliation. As he watched Rebecca kneel in the snow to help an elderly runner tie her laces, something unfamiliar stirred inside him. It wasn't admiration for beauty, it was admiration for sincerity. Rebecca noticed him only when the event coordinator introduced them. "This is Andrew Cole, the investor who made today possible." Andrew extended his hand, his smile polished but curious. Rebecca shook it, her grip firm despite the cold, and thanked him, not for the publicity, but for funding prenatal health vouchers. That caught his attention. Most people praised him for visibility or prestige. Rebecca praised him for impact. As the marathon began and runners moved like a wave across the frozen street, Andrew found himself lingering beside her rather than retreating to the heated sponsor tent. They spoke about Vermont winters, about public health policy, about the discipline required to train for long-distance races. Rebecca confessed she ran every dawn to clear her mind. Andrew admitted he worked every dawn to outrun his past. There was no dramatic spark, no instant romance, only a quiet alignment of ambition and empathy. Snow gathered on their shoulders unnoticed as the conversation stretched. For the first time in years, Andrew wasn't thinking about closing deals or climbing higher. He was thinking about whether this woman might see beyond his ambition to the boy who once felt small. Later that afternoon, as medals were handed out and volunteers packed equipment, Andrew offered Rebecca a ride home. She hesitated, careful by nature, but accepted when she recognized sincerity in his tone. The drive through snow-lined streets was calm, filled with thoughtful pauses rather than forced charm. Andrew spoke about his mother, Lorraine, who measured love in status and success. Rebecca spoke about her dream of advocating nationally for maternal health care reform someday. He admired her clarity of purpose. She admired his determination to rebuild his life from scarcity. When he dropped her off at her modest townhouse, he didn't ask for anything more than coffee the following week. Rebecca watched his car disappear down the quiet street, unaware that this meeting would alter the trajectory of her life. Andrew, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, felt something both promising and dangerous take root, a desire not just to win in business, but to win her. Neither of them knew then that ambition, when left unchecked, could curdle into something darker. But on that snowy evening, hope felt simple. A promise had begun in the snow, fragile and bright. 3 years after that winter marathon, Rebecca and Andrew stood inside a cramped downtown office that smelled faintly of dust and printer ink, staring at unpaid invoices stacked like quiet accusations on Andrew's desk. Their early courtship had blossomed into marriage after 2 years of steady dating filled with road trips, long conversations about purpose, and evenings cooking together in Rebecca's small kitchen. Andrew had proposed by Lake Champlain at sunrise, promising her not just love, but partnership. Yet marriage did not shield them from reality. Andrew's real estate venture, launched with bold confidence, began to crumble when a major investor abruptly withdrew funding. The market shifted, lenders tightened terms, and projects stalled mid-development. Rebecca watched her husband transform from determined to desperate. He barely slept, pacing their apartment at night, whispering calculations under his breath. She saw not a failing businessman, but the frightened boy he rarely admitted still existed. While Andrew felt humiliation claw at his pride, Rebecca felt resolve harden in her chest. She had married him for better or worse, not for comfort alone. When the bank threatened foreclosure on one of Andrew's earliest properties, Rebecca took action without drama. She visited her father, Thomas Hale, at his modest Vermont home, sitting across from him at the wooden kitchen table where she had done homework as a child. She explained the situation carefully, no exaggeration, no manipulation. Thomas listened, his firefighter's instincts trained to detect panic beneath calm words. Judith, ever practical, asked detailed questions about interest rates and repayment timelines. After days of discussion, Thomas agreed to co-sign a risky loan, not because he believed in Andrew's business model, but because he believed in Rebecca's judgment. Andrew, initially resistant to accepting help, swallowed his pride when he realized refusing would mean total collapse. That moment etched something complicated into him. Gratitude mingled with resentment. He appreciated Rebecca's loyalty, yet hated the reminder that he needed saving. Rebecca, meanwhile, tightened their household budget, sold personal jewelry gifted by distant relatives, and picked up additional consulting work in public health to keep cash flowing. She did it quietly, never using sacrifice as leverage. Months passed in relentless tension. Andrew rebuilt slowly, negotiating smaller deals, working twice as hard to prove himself capable. Rebecca remained his steady anchor, bringing him late dinners at the office, reminding him gently that worth was not measured by quarterly returns. In private, Andrew would sometimes rest his head against her shoulder and confess his fear of becoming like his absent father, unreliable and forgotten. Rebecca would assure him that he was different, that perseverance mattered more than setbacks. Their bond during that season deepened in a way only struggle can forge. Yet beneath that unity, a subtle imbalance took root. Andrew began associating vulnerability with weakness, even though Rebecca had loved him through it. He vowed internally that he would never again stand in a room where someone pitied him. If success required hardness, he would cultivate it. Rebecca saw only resilience growing in him, unaware that the same determination pushing him upward could one day eclipse the tenderness that had first drawn them together. The first pregnancy came quietly, almost shyly, announced by a trembling smile in their bathroom mirror one early spring morning. Rebecca had stood there holding the test in both hands as if it were something sacred, her heart racing not with fear but gratitude. After years of focusing on Andrew's rebuilding career, motherhood felt like a natural next chapter. Andrew lifted her off the floor when she told him, spinning her around with a laugh that echoed through their apartment. For a few weeks, the world felt lighter. Rebecca began researching prenatal nutrition, carefully planning balanced meals, reducing her morning runs to protect the fragile life inside her. Andrew spoke about buying a larger house someday, imagining a nursery painted in soft blue or warm yellow. He even called Lorraine, who surprised them both by sounding almost tender at the news. Rebecca allowed herself to dream fully, believing the storm of financial struggle was finally behind them. She did not yet understand how fragile joy could be. The miscarriage happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon, without warning dramatic enough to prepare them. Rebecca had been reviewing reports for a maternal outreach program when a sudden sharp pain forced her to double over. Within hours she was in a hospital room under harsh fluorescent lights, gripping Andrew's hand while doctors moved with professional urgency around her. The room felt too cold, too sterile, too detached from the fragile hope she had nurtured. When the doctor gently explained that the pregnancy could not be saved, Rebecca felt the words sink slowly, like snow melting into ice water. She cried quietly, not dramatically, but with a grief so deep it felt physical. Andrew stood beside the bed, his jaw tight, staring at a distant point on the wall. He did not cry. He did not shout. He simply withdrew. Rebecca reached for him, but he seemed to fold inward, processing loss as failure rather than heartbreak. In the weeks that followed, their apartment felt unfamiliar. Rebecca mourned openly, allowing herself to feel the absence of what could have been. She attended follow-up appointments alone when Andrew claimed urgent meetings demanded his attention. He returned home late, burying himself in expanding projects that were finally beginning to show promise. Investors were calling again. Deals were stabilizing. To Andrew, progress became the antidote to grief. To Rebecca, it felt like abandonment in slow motion. Olivia Brooks, her best friend, visited often, bringing food and fierce honesty. She warned Rebecca that unresolved pain could create distance if not confronted. Rebecca defended Andrew, insisting he was simply coping differently. Yet late at night, when Andrew lay rigid beside her, staring at the ceiling instead of holding her, she felt something shift between them. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. A crack had formed. Not from betrayal, not yet, but from silence. And silence, she would one day learn, can be more dangerous than conflict. By the following year, Andrew Cole was no longer the anxious developer pacing unpaid invoices. His risk had paid off. A major luxury condominium project in downtown Chicago closed successfully, earning him recognition among elite investors who once ignored him. The celebration took place on a glass-walled rooftop overlooking the city skyline, strings of golden lights reflecting off polished marble floors. Rebecca stood beside him in a navy silk dress, proud but quietly observant as executives toasted Andrew's unstoppable rise. He looked different now, more confident, more commanding, his laughter louder, his handshake firmer. Lorraine Cole moved through the crowd with sharp elegance, introducing her son as if she had personally sculpted his success. Rebecca watched it all with warmth, though she felt slightly displaced in the glittering environment. She preferred community halls and healthcare fundraisers. This world was louder, sharper, competitive. Still, she smiled genuinely when Andrew thanked her publicly for standing by him through hard years. For a moment, it felt like their struggle had meaning. It was during the second round of champagne that Cassandra Blake entered the scene. Introduced by Marcus Green as the luxury brand consultant hired to refine Andrew's expanding public image, she arrived in a tailored ivory gown that commanded attention without effort. Cassandra's beauty was striking, but it was her composure that unsettled people. She spoke softly, confidently, her words measured like someone who had learned that survival depended on precision. Raised in a series of foster homes, Cassandra had long ago mastered the art of reading rooms before speaking. She congratulated Andrew with poised admiration, commenting on how his brand could scale nationally with the right positioning. Rebecca shook her hand politely, sensing neither threat nor friendship, only calculation. Cassandra's gaze lingered a second too long on Andrew when he laughed at her suggestions. Andrew, for his part, seemed energized by her strategic ideas. It was business, nothing more, at least on the surface. Yet beneath the sparkle of the evening, a quiet dynamic had begun to form, subtle, unspoken, dangerous. As the night deepened and music softened into background ambience, Rebecca stepped outside onto the balcony for air. The wind carried the distant hum of the city below. Andrew joined her briefly, wrapping an arm around her waist, his eyes shining with victory. "We made it," he whispered, as if success belonged equally to them. Rebecca believed him. She told him she was proud, not of the money, but of his perseverance. He kissed her forehead before being called back inside by Marcus and Cassandra, who were discussing expansion strategies. Rebecca remained outside a few minutes longer, watching her husband from afar through the glass. She noticed how easily he moved in this elevated world, how naturally he absorbed admiration. She told herself growth was good. Yet somewhere in her intuition, a flicker stirred. Andrew no longer feared being small. Now, perhaps, he feared being ordinary. And Cassandra, with her polished presence and sharp understanding of ambition, had entered precisely at the moment he felt invincible. Cassandra Blake did not force her way into Andrew's world, she threaded herself into it with patience and intention. Within weeks of the rooftop celebration, she began attending strategy meetings, offering refined branding proposals that impressed investors. She suggested wardrobe upgrades for Andrew, advised on speech tones during investor calls, and even recommended exclusive networking circles he should enter. Rebecca first noticed the shift when Andrew replaced his understated suits with sharper, more expensive cuts Cassandra had recommended. It wasn't the clothing that unsettled her, it was the language he began using. Words like positioning, image dominance, and perception leverage crept into everyday conversation. When Rebecca mentioned wanting to restart her maternal health outreach project, Andrew distractedly nodded but redirected the discussion to expansion plans in Miami. Cassandra, meanwhile, sent polite emails to Rebecca about event coordination, maintaining the appearance of professionalism. Yet her compliments often carried subtle undertones, praising Andrew's limitless potential while describing Rebecca as grounded and supportive. The phrasing seemed harmless, but it placed Rebecca gently behind him rather than beside him. Olivia Brooks noticed the imbalance before Rebecca did. Over dinner at a quiet bistro, Olivia leaned forward and asked direct questions. Why is your husband's consultant texting him at midnight about branding strategies? Rebecca laughed it off initially, explaining that high-level deals required odd hours. Olivia's experience as a criminal defense attorney had sharpened her instincts. She wasn't accusing, she was observing patterns. Cassandra began appearing at private investor dinners where spouses were rarely invited, positioning herself as indispensable to Andrew's image overhaul. Lorraine Cole quickly took a liking to Cassandra, praising her sophistication and calling her exactly the type of woman who understands ambition. The comment stung Rebecca more than she admitted. Lorraine had always viewed Rebecca as too soft, too community-focused, and sufficiently glamorous for Andrew's expanding status. Rebecca reassured herself that insecurity had no place in a strong marriage. Yet late at night, she noticed Andrew smiling at his phone before locking it quickly when she entered the room. The red flags weren't dramatic, they were silk-wrapped, elegant, almost invisible. One evening, during a networking gala Rebecca attended reluctantly, Cassandra approached her with a glass of sparkling water and a sympathetic smile. She spoke about how difficult it must be to adjust to Andrew's rising profile and how not everyone is built for the pressure of elite circles. The words were framed as concern but carried quiet condescension. Rebecca responded with calm dignity, explaining that purpose, not status, guided her life. Cassandra's eyes flickered briefly, an unreadable expression passing through them, before she returned to Andrew's side. From across the ballroom, Rebecca watched them discuss something animatedly, their heads leaning close. Andrew seemed invigorated by Cassandra's strategic mind, by the way she mirrored his hunger for expansion. Rebecca told herself that trust meant allowing space. Still, a faint unease settled into her chest. Cassandra had not overtaken her life, she had simply positioned herself within it. And positioning, Rebecca would soon learn, can be more powerful than confrontation. It happened on an ordinary Thursday night, the kind of evening that should have felt safe. Andrew had left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered upstairs. Rebecca wasn't searching for anything, she was preparing tea when the screen lit up with a message preview from Cassandra. The words were brief but intimate in tone. Tonight was perfect. You deserve more than limitations. Rebecca froze, staring at the glowing screen as if it might rearrange itself into something harmless. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself not to jump to conclusions. When she unlocked the phone using the passcode Andrew had once shared openly, she found the message thread nearly empty. Only a few neutral exchanges remained. The rest had been deleted. Rebecca stood there, torn between confrontation and caution. She wasn't naive, but she also wasn't reckless. She placed the phone back exactly where it had been, her mind racing. When Andrew came downstairs, hair damp and expression calm, she steadied him carefully. He kissed her cheek casually, asking about dinner as though nothing in the world had shifted. The following weekend, Andrew claimed he needed to meet Cassandra to finalize a branding proposal for an upcoming luxury summit. Rebecca offered to join them for lunch afterward, but Andrew hesitated for half a second too long before saying it would be strictly business. Later that evening, she noticed a velvet jewelry box tucked into his briefcase. Curiosity battled restraint until she finally opened it when he stepped out to take a call. Inside was a diamond bracelet, elegant, expensive, unmistakably personal. When Andrew returned, she asked about it calmly. He responded without blinking, explaining it was a gift for Cassandra as appreciation for closing a major partnership deal. It's normal at this level, he insisted. Clients expect gestures. Rebecca nodded slowly, her public health training having taught her that behavior patterns often revealed more than isolated events. Still, she chose silence. She told herself that trust meant patience. Yet a quiet fracture deepened inside her, one she could neither name nor ignore. Meanwhile, Cassandra adjusted her strategy. She no longer needed secrecy, she needed emotional leverage. Raised in instability, she understood how to insert herself into cracks within relationships. She began praising Andrew for working harder than anyone she'd ever known, subtly reinforcing his belief that Rebecca did not fully grasp the magnitude of his ambition. Lorraine Cole's approval of Cassandra intensified as she began inviting her to private luncheons, discussing Andrew's future as though Rebecca were peripheral. Rebecca felt the distance growing, not through explosive arguments, but through quiet exclusions. One night, as Andrew slept beside her, she lay awake remembering the snowy marathon where he had admired her compassion. She wondered when admiration had transformed into comparison. She still loved him deeply, still believed in the man who once feared becoming like his father. But something was changing. And for the first time, Rebecca felt that silence might not protect her marriage, it might be slowly eroding it. The second pregnancy was discovered on a quiet autumn morning, far less celebratory than the first. Rebecca sat alone on the edge of their bed, holding the positive test in trembling fingers, her emotions tangled between hope and fear. After the miscarriage, every possibility carried weight. She scheduled a doctor's appointment immediately and sat in the examination room gripping the paper gown, listening as the physician carefully explained that her medical history now classified her pregnancy as high risk. Strict rest, reduced stress, and close monitoring would be essential. When she told Andrew that evening, he hugged her, but the embrace felt measured rather than exuberant. He expressed happiness, yet his eyes seemed preoccupied, calculating timelines around upcoming business expansions. Rebecca noticed the subtle hesitation, but she focused on the miracle growing inside her. She whispered to herself that this time would be different. She followed every instruction precisely, adjusting her exercise, modifying her diet, documenting every symptom in a small leather journal she kept by her bedside. As weeks passed, Rebecca dedicated herself fully to protecting the fragile life within her. She paused her long-distance running routine and replaced it with gentle walks around the neighborhood. She reduced her workload and declined several outreach opportunities, even though she had been planning to relaunch her maternal health initiative. Olivia visited often, bringing books and reassurances, reminding Rebecca that stress management would be critical. Meanwhile, Andrew's schedule grew increasingly chaotic. Expansion talks in Miami and Los Angeles demanded travel, and Cassandra's role in coordinating luxury branding intensified. Rebecca often found herself alone during evening appointments, watching ultrasound monitors flicker while Andrew dialed in briefly from airports or boardrooms. His voice would soften momentarily when hearing the baby's heartbeat, yet it carried an urgency to return to meetings. Rebecca convinced herself that sacrifice for future security was understandable. She wanted Andrew to succeed, but she also wanted him present. The imbalance was becoming more difficult to ignore. Cassandra observed the pregnancy news with strategic composure. She congratulated Andrew professionally, yet privately questioned how fatherhood might complicate their dynamic. She understood ambition's hunger, children represented vulnerability. Andrew, increasingly drawn to Cassandra's sharp understanding of expansion and influence, began confiding in her about fears he did not share with Rebecca, concerns about slowing momentum or appearing domesticated in competitive circles. Cassandra reinforced the idea that greatness required singular focus. Lorraine Cole echoed similar sentiments, advising Andrew that legacy demanded sacrifice. Rebecca remained unaware of these layered conversations, trusting that marriage meant unity despite temporary strain. Late at night, she placed her hand over her growing belly and whispered promises of protection. She believed love would anchor everything. But ambition, once fed consistently, can grow louder than loyalty. And in the quiet space between hospital appointments and investor calls, something unseen was steadily tightening around her life. The penthouse dinner overlooking Manhattan was designed to impress foreign investors considering a partnership in Andrew's newest luxury development. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, and a private chef orchestrated a 5-course tasting menu beneath panoramic city lights. Rebecca hesitated before attending, aware that her pregnancy required caution, but Andrew insisted her presence would project stability. She wore a flowing emerald gown that accommodated her growing belly gracefully, determined to stand confidently beside her husband. From the moment they entered, however, she sensed a shift. Cassandra moved effortlessly among guests, introducing Andrew as though she were an equal partner in both business and vision. She touched his arm lightly when emphasizing points, laughing at his remarks with a familiarity that bordered on intimate. Rebecca remained composed, speaking warmly with investors' spouses, but she could not ignore the subtle choreography unfolding across the room. Andrew seemed energized by Cassandra's presence, responding to her cues instinctively, as if they shared a silent language built on ambition. During dinner, a senior investor asked Andrew about succession plans and family stability, noting how important image consistency was in elite financial circles. Before Rebecca could answer a light-hearted question about impending parenthood, Cassandra interjected smoothly, redirecting the conversation toward Andrew's strategic scalability rather than domestic priorities. The interruption was polite but decisive. Rebecca felt the sting, though she masked it with a smile. Andrew did not correct Cassandra. Instead, he leaned further into discussions about global branding, nodding approvingly as Cassandra elaborated on positioning him as a visionary rather than a family man. The distinction was subtle yet powerful. Rebecca's hand instinctively rested over her stomach, grounding herself in the quiet miracle growing inside her. Olivia's earlier warnings echoed faintly in her mind, but she dismissed them. Surely Andrew understood boundaries. Surely he would not allow business alliances to erode personal loyalty. Yet as the evening progressed, she noticed how frequently his gaze sought Cassandra's approval when delivering bold projections. When the event concluded and guests departed in sleek black cars, Rebecca waited by the elevator while Andrew finalized details with Cassandra near the bar. She observed the closeness between them, not physical, but emotional, charged with shared ambition. Cassandra's voice softened as she reminded Andrew that tonight marked only the beginning of his ascent. Rebecca caught a fragment of their exchange about unlimited horizons, and something tightened in her chest. On the drive home, Andrew praised Cassandra's performance at dinner, describing her as indispensable to his growth. Rebecca listened quietly, her thoughts tangled between pride in his success and unease at her diminishing presence in these defining moments. The city lights blurred past the window as she leaned back against the seat, exhaustion creeping over her. She told herself that marriage required resilience. But somewhere deep within, she sensed that resilience without confrontation might soon become complicity in her own displacement. Winter returned, and with it came Andrew's decision to host a strategic retreat in Aspen under the pretense of investor bonding. Rebecca's doctor had advised minimal travel due to the high-risk nature of her pregnancy, and she reluctantly agreed to remain home under strict monitoring. Andrew assured her the trip would be brief and essential for long-term stability. Yet social media told a more elaborate story. Photographs surfaced of Andrew in a private ski lodge, champagne glasses raised against snow-covered mountains, Cassandra at his side dressed in white fur and confidence. The retreat appeared less corporate and more indulgent. Rebecca tried not to scroll, but curiosity betrayed her. She studied each image carefully, noting Cassandra's proximity, Andrew's relaxed smile, the absence of any visible restraint. Olivia called immediately, anger barely contained in her voice. "That's not business," she said firmly. Rebecca defended Andrew reflexively, but her defense felt thinner than before. Alone in the quiet house, she rested her hand over her belly and whispered reassurances to her unborn child, even as doubt crept into her thoughts. Meanwhile, in Aspen's rarefied air, Andrew felt liberated. The luxury of the lodge, the admiration from investors, and Cassandra's unwavering focus on his vision made him feel untouchable. She spoke openly about expansion into international markets, painting futures where his name would carry influence across continents. In moments away from the group, she praised his decisiveness and hinted that limitations, emotional or domestic, often slowed men destined for greatness. Andrew did not directly agree, but he did not reject the suggestion either. Cassandra understood his vulnerabilities, the fear of appearing small again, the need to outgrow his impoverished childhood. She subtly reinforced the narrative that extraordinary men required extraordinary freedom. Back in Vermont, Rebecca attended a routine prenatal appointment alone. The doctor emphasized again the fragility of her condition and warned that stress could trigger complications. Rebecca nodded, masking emotional strain behind calm composure. She refused to let resentment jeopardize her pregnancy. Olivia, unwilling to remain passive, confronted Andrew upon his return to Chicago. She arranged a private meeting at his office under the guise of discussing legal matters. Her tone was direct but controlled. She reminded him of Rebecca's health risks and the optics of his highly visible retreat. Andrew bristled, interpreting her concern as interference. He insisted that growth required perception management and that Rebecca understood sacrifice. Olivia left the office unsettled, recognizing in Andrew a hardening she had not seen before. That evening, Rebecca welcomed him home quietly. He brought gifts, luxury skincare products, and a designer scarf, tokens of apology disguised as generosity. She thanked him sincerely but searched his eyes for reassurance that did not fully arrive. As they prepared for bed, she realized that while Andrew's lifestyle expanded, her world had narrowed to careful steps and cautious breathing. The contrast between their realities widened like a silent canyon, and neither seemed prepared to bridge it. By early spring, Cassandra's presence in Andrew's professional life had shifted from strategic consultant to visible companion. At a high-profile commercial real estate summit in Los Angeles, she appeared beside him not as staff, but as a partner in presentation. Her name was printed on the event program beneath his, listed as Executive Brand Director. Rebecca learned about the summit not from Andrew directly, but from Marcus Green, who mentioned it casually during a phone call. When Rebecca asked Andrew about the title, he dismissed it as a branding formality. Yet the photos released from the event told another story. Cassandra stood beside Andrew during keynote introductions, speaking confidently about future acquisitions, while Rebecca's absence was noticeable. Industry blogs began speculating about Andrew's dynamic partnership, framing Cassandra as the woman redefining his trajectory. Rebecca read the commentary quietly, feeling as though she were watching her marriage rewritten in public without her consent. The humiliation was subtle but cutting. No one explicitly replaced her, but the world began perceiving Cassandra as central to Andrew's success. Lorraine Cole exacerbated the situation during a private family brunch in Chicago. She praised Cassandra's sophistication openly, commenting that Andrew finally had someone who understood the scale of his ambition. Rebecca sat still, absorbing the comparison without responding. Her mother-in-law's words were not accidental, they were deliberate evaluations. Thomas Hale, during a phone call later that week, sensed strain in his daughter's voice and gently encouraged her to stand firm in her worth. Judith reminded her that pregnancy required peace, not silent suffering. Meanwhile, Andrew continued moving at full speed, scheduling back-to-back appearances with Cassandra at investment panels. He justified her constant presence as necessary for brand cohesion. Rebecca wondered privately whether cohesion meant replacing her in spaces that once belonged to them. She began noticing how often Andrew's tone changed when Cassandra entered a room, more animated, more focused, more eager to impress. It was no longer about suspicion. It was about visibility. Cassandra had moved from shadow to spotlight. One evening, Rebecca attended a local charity dinner alone, determined not to isolate herself. During the event, a colleague cautiously asked whether she would be joining Andrew at the upcoming Miami Gala. The assumption that she might not be invited struck her deeply. When she returned home, she confronted Andrew calmly about public perception. He responded defensively, accusing her of insecurity and misunderstanding high-level networking dynamics. The conversation did not escalate into shouting, but it left a residue of distance. Rebecca realized that what hurt most was not Cassandra's ambition, it was Andrew's failure to protect boundaries. That night, as she lay awake listening to his steady breathing, she understood that disrespect did not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it seeped into daily life through repeated dismissals and subtle reassignments of importance. And though she still loved him, she could no longer ignore that something fundamental had shifted. The confrontation began on a quiet Saturday afternoon, not with shouting but with stillness. Rebecca had spent the morning organizing medical documents and prenatal schedules when she found a receipt tucked inside Andrew's jacket pocket. It was for a private dining suite at an exclusive Chicago restaurant, dated 2 nights prior, a night Andrew had claimed he was in meetings with investors. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, receipt in hand, her thoughts steady. Rather than frantic. She waited until Andrew returned home before placing the paper in front of him without accusation. He glanced at it briefly and dismissed it as a client engagement, his tone flat. Rebecca did not raise her voice. Instead, she asked one simple question: why was Cassandra there? Andrew hesitated just long enough to confirm her suspicion. He insisted it was strategic, that proximity in business cultivated trust. Rebecca felt something inside her solidify. For the first time, she did not defend him or rationalize the situation. She asked directly whether their marriage still held equal value to his ambitions. Before Andrew could answer fully, the doorbell rang. Cassandra stood outside, composed and uninvited, claiming she had urgent documents Andrew needed to review. The timing felt deliberate. Rebecca stepped aside to let her in, determined not to retreat from her own home. Tension filled the living room as Cassandra placed a folder on the coffee table, speaking as though Rebecca were a peripheral presence. Rebecca noticed how Cassandra's eyes scanned the house, not admiring, but assessing. When Rebecca calmly mentioned the dinner receipt, Cassandra did not flinch. She simply remarked that Andrew required strong allies who understood vision beyond domestic comfort. The statement, veiled as professional commentary, carried clear insinuation. Andrew shifted uncomfortably but did not immediately correct her. Rebecca's chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from clarity. She realized this was no longer subtle positioning, it was open encroachment. She asked Cassandra directly whether her role extended beyond branding. Cassandra's slight smile offered no denial. The exchange escalated without shouting, but the emotional temperature rose sharply. Andrew attempted to de-escalate, claiming the tension was unnecessary and that stress endangered Rebecca's pregnancy. The irony stung. Rebecca reminded him that emotional neglect could be equally harmful. Cassandra stood calmly, observing the dynamic with calculated patience. For a moment, Rebecca saw the entire pattern laid bare: ambition feeding ego, ego welcoming validation, validation displacing loyalty. She did not scream. She did not beg. Instead, she stated quietly that respect within marriage required boundaries. Andrew's response was noncommittal, framed in terms of strategic necessity. Cassandra eventually left, but not before casting one last unreadable glance at Rebecca. After the door closed, silence filled the house like heavy fog. Rebecca felt a weight of impending change settle over her life. The confrontation had not resolved anything, it had revealed everything. And revelation, she sensed, was only the beginning. The driveway confrontation happened 3 evenings later, beneath a sky heavy with approaching rain. Rebecca had asked Andrew for one final, uninterrupted conversation about boundaries and public humiliation. She was calmer than she had ever been, determined to speak clearly rather than emotionally. As they stood near the garage entrance, she told him she would no longer tolerate being sidelined while another woman publicly positioned herself as his equal. Andrew responded with visible frustration, accusing her of dramatizing professional strategy. Their voices were not screaming, but they were sharp. Rebecca reminded him that pregnancy required stability, not spectacle. Just as the conversation reached its most fragile point, Cassandra's car pulled into the driveway unexpectedly. She stepped out without hesitation, claiming Andrew needed to review urgent financial documents before an early flight. The intrusion felt intentional. Rebecca's heart pounded, but she refused to retreat. She addressed Cassandra directly, telling her that showing up uninvited to a married couple's home crossed a line that branding contracts could not justify. Cassandra's composure thinned for the first time. She dismissed Rebecca's words as insecurity masquerading as morality. Andrew attempted to intervene, but his tone lacked authority. The tension escalated quickly, fueled by weeks of unspoken resentment. Rebecca, her hand instinctively resting over her swollen belly, demanded clarity. Was Cassandra part of business, or something more? Cassandra stepped closer, her voice low and cutting, insisting that Andrew deserved a partner who understood scale, not sentiment. The comment ignited something raw. Rebecca stood firm, refusing to be minimized. In the heat of the exchange, Cassandra shoved her. It was not theatrical, it was abrupt, forceful, and reckless. Rebecca lost balance instantly, her foot slipping on damp concrete. She fell heavily onto the driveway, the impact echoing against the garage door. Pain shot through her abdomen as shock paralyzed the moment. For one suspended second, silence dominated. Then blood spread beneath her. Andrew stood frozen, staring at the scene as though it were abstract rather than real. His first reaction was disbelief, followed by a hollow laugh, an unsettling sound born from shock and ego, not humor. Cassandra stepped back, startled by the severity of the outcome. Rebecca struggled to breathe, her mind racing through fear for the life inside her. Instinct overrode humiliation. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone and called Olivia, her voice barely steady enough to form words. Cassandra muttered that this had gone too far, but Andrew remained motionless, overwhelmed by the collision of consequence and pride. Rain began falling lightly, mixing with blood on the pavement. Rebecca's vision blurred as pain intensified. The last thing she heard before slipping toward unconsciousness was Olivia's urgent promise through the phone, "Stay with me. I'm coming." The world narrowed to darkness. And in that darkness, survival would become uncertain. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though to Rebecca it felt like hours suspended between pain and fading consciousness. Olivia reached the driveway just as paramedics were lifting Rebecca onto a stretcher, her clothes soaked, her face pale but determined. Andrew stood a few feet away, shaking yet still struggling to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Cassandra had already retreated to her car, her composure fractured for the first time since entering their lives. Sirens pierced the night as Rebecca was rushed to St. Mary's Medical Center, where Dr. Leonard Whitmore was on call. The trauma surgeon, a man whose calm exterior masked years of personal grief after losing his wife during childbirth, immediately assessed the situation. Rebecca was bleeding internally. The pregnancy was compromised. Within minutes, she was wheeled into emergency surgery. Olivia remained in the waiting area, refusing to sit, replaying Rebecca's strained voice in her mind. When Dr. Whitmore emerged briefly, his words were precise but heavy. "It's a 50-50 chance. We are fighting for both of them." Inside the operating room, machines beeped in relentless rhythm as a team of surgeons worked against time. Dr. Whitmore's focus was unwavering, yet the stakes felt personal. He understood too well what it meant to lose both mother and child. Rebecca's condition fluctuated rapidly. Complications from the fall intensified her vulnerability. Nurses moved with disciplined urgency, including Maya Sanders, who had assisted in dozens of critical deliveries but rarely felt the emotional weight so sharply. Hours passed without certainty. In the waiting area, Olivia contacted Thomas and Judith Hale, her voice steady despite exhaustion. Rebecca's parents immediately began driving through the night from Vermont. Andrew arrived at the hospital later, disoriented and pale. He attempted to speak with Olivia, but she refused to engage beyond necessary updates. The gravity of his silence during the incident hung between them like a verdict not yet spoken. Just before dawn, Dr. Whitmore emerged again, his surgical cap removed, his expression controlled but cautious. Rebecca had survived the immediate trauma, though she remained in critical condition. The baby's situation was precarious. Emergency interventions had stabilized vital signs temporarily. "We are not out of danger," he said firmly. "The next 48 hours will determine everything." Olivia exhaled for the first time since the ambulance left the driveway. Andrew leaned against the wall, finally absorbing the weight of consequence. The sterile hospital corridors offered no distraction from reality. Survival was no longer theoretical, it was fragile and uncertain. Rebecca lay unconscious in the ICU, her body fighting quietly, her child's heartbeat monitored beside her own. Outside that room, futures hung suspended on the thinnest possible thread. While Rebecca remained in the intensive care unit surrounded by quiet machines and controlled lighting, the outside world moved with disturbing normalcy. Within days of the surgery, discrete photographs surfaced online showing Andrew and Cassandra entering a private members club in downtown Chicago. The images were grainy but unmistakable. Cassandra wore black, her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral. Andrew walked beside her, jaw set, attempting to maintain composure under scrutiny. To the public eye, it appeared as though nothing catastrophic had occurred. The narrative circulating among elite circles framed Rebecca's hospitalization as a tragic domestic accident, vague and sanitized. Olivia saw the photos first and felt a surge of anger she rarely allowed herself. She sat beside Rebecca's hospital bed later that evening, watching monitors track vital signs, and wondered how a man could compartmentalize so completely. Andrew justified his public appearances as damage control, claiming investors needed reassurance that operations would not falter. But the timing revealed something colder. Ambition had not paused for consequence. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere remained tense and fragile. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness, her body weakened but resisting collapse. Dr. Whitmore maintained cautious optimism, explaining to Thomas and Judith that complications could still arise without warning. Judith, drawing on her nursing background, remained calm while absorbing each update with clinical focus. Thomas stood quietly near the window, his protective instincts battling helplessness. Nurse Maya Sanders ensured Rebecca's comfort, speaking gently to her even when she could not fully respond. Olivia coordinated communication carefully, limiting Andrew's access to Rebecca's room unless medical updates required his presence. Andrew visited sporadically, standing awkwardly beside the bed, unsure how to bridge the silence between them. He spoke about pending projects as though stability in business might counterbalance instability in life. Rebecca, when briefly conscious, avoided extended eye contact, her energy reserved for survival rather than confrontation. Cassandra, meanwhile, recalibrated her position. She understood that visible association with Andrew during a medical crisis required careful optics. She advised him on maintaining composure and managing public perception, subtly reinforcing the idea that emotional vulnerability could weaken investor confidence. Andrew clung to that logic as justification for his choices. Yet beneath his controlled exterior, unease grew. Late at night, alone in his penthouse office, he replayed the driveway scene repeatedly. The sound of Rebecca's fall echoed louder than investor applause ever had. Still, pride prevented immediate accountability. He convinced himself that events had escalated unintentionally and that survival, if achieved, would allow everything to be fixed. But survival would not erase memory. In the sterile hospital room, Rebecca's body fought for life. Outside, ambition continued uninterrupted. And that contrast, between fragile humanity and relentless ego, would soon demand reckoning. Olivia Brooks had spent years navigating criminal courtrooms, learning how truth often hid behind polished narratives. As Rebecca's condition stabilized slightly, Olivia shifted from bedside vigil to strategic action. She requested copies of hospital reports, documenting every detail surrounding the fall. Then she contacted investigator Daniel Ruiz, a former homicide detective known for methodical precision and moral clarity. Daniel agreed to review the incident independently, not as a favor, but because something about the circumstances felt incomplete. The official story described an accidental slip during an argument, yet Olivia knew Rebecca's temperament. She did not escalate recklessly. Daniel began by canvassing neighboring properties near the driveway, asking about security cameras and incidental recordings. Within 48 hours, a breakthrough emerged. A neighbor's outdoor camera had captured part of the confrontation. The footage was distant but clear enough to show Cassandra's sudden forward motion and Rebecca's abrupt loss of balance. There was no visible attempt to prevent the fall. Andrew's stillness was unmistakable. When Olivia reviewed the footage in Daniel's modest office, she felt a chill settle into her spine. The shove was not theatrical, it was impulsive and aggressive. Daniel paused the frame repeatedly, examining angles and timestamps. He explained that while the video did not capture every spoken word, physical intent could still be established. Olivia requested that the evidence remain confidential until Rebecca regained full cognitive strength to provide her own statement. Meanwhile, she began reviewing Andrew's recent financial activities, sensing that personal betrayal might intertwine with broader misconduct. Daniel discovered unusual asset transfers linked to offshore accounts, several of which connected indirectly to a luxury lifestyle far beyond Cassandra's known income. The pattern suggested concealed financial entanglements rather than simple branding compensation. As the layers unfolded, Olivia realized this case would not remain domestic, it would expand into corporate territory. Rebecca, still weak but conscious for longer intervals, listened carefully as Olivia updated her in controlled increments. Dr. Whitmore encouraged emotional stability, cautioning that stress could hinder recovery. Rebecca absorbed the information without visible outrage. Instead, her expression hardened with clarity. She had once believed silence preserved dignity, now she understood that silence preserved injustice. When Daniel visited her hospital room discreetly, he asked for her recollection of the event. Rebecca described the shove calmly, her voice steady despite lingering pain. She refused to exaggerate, recounting only what she knew to be true. Daniel respected her restraint. Outside the hospital walls, Andrew remained unaware of the investigation's depth. Cassandra sensed rising tension but attributed it to public scrutiny rather than evidence. What neither anticipated was how thoroughly the truth was assembling itself. And truth, once organized, rarely retreats quietly. Weeks after the surgery, when doctors cautiously believed Rebecca's body was stabilizing, an unexpected complication forced another emergency decision. Severe internal stress triggered premature labor, and Dr. Leonard Whitmore was summoned once again under urgent conditions. The hospital room shifted instantly from recovery to crisis. Rebecca, pale but conscious, understood the risk without dramatics. She squeezed Olivia's hand briefly before being rushed toward the operating suite. Thomas and Judith stood together in silent prayer, their strength rooted in quiet faith rather than panic. Dr. Whitmore's voice remained calm as he explained that early delivery offered the best chance for both mother and child. The phrase 50-50 returned like an echo from weeks prior. Machines were prepared, neonatal specialists alerted, and the surgical lights blazed overhead. Rebecca felt fear, but beneath it lay resolve. She whispered softly to her unborn son that they would survive together. The procedure began under tense precision, every movement deliberate and measured. Hours passed in relentless focus. Dr. Whitmore navigated complications with disciplined concentration, refusing to surrender to doubt. Nurse Maya Sanders monitored vital signs carefully, her steady presence a silent reassurance. Rebecca drifted in and out of awareness, her strength fluctuating but never collapsing entirely. Then, at last, a fragile cry pierced the surgical room. It was not loud, not robust, but it was unmistakable. A baby boy had entered the world against statistical odds. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she carefully transferred the infant to neonatal care specialists for immediate evaluation. Rebecca remained under close supervision, her condition still delicate but stabilizing gradually. When Dr. Whitmore finally stepped into the waiting area, his usually composed demeanor softened. "They are both alive," he announced. "It is nothing short of a miracle." Thomas exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Judith covered her mouth, overwhelmed by relief. Olivia closed her eyes, whispering gratitude under her breath. The baby was named Elijah Hale Cole, Elijah for resilience, Hale for Rebecca's lineage of strength. Though born prematurely, his vital signs improved steadily over the following days. Rebecca, recovering in a monitored room, held him carefully for the first time, her tears falling silently onto his tiny blanket. In that moment, the noise of scandal, ambition, and betrayal faded into insignificance. She had survived. He had survived. Andrew visited once, standing awkwardly near the incubator before offering restrained congratulations. The emotional distance between them had widened beyond immediate repair. Cassandra remained conspicuously absent from the hospital, choosing discretion over presence. Yet beneath the miracle of birth, consequences were still forming quietly. Survival did not erase accountability. It simply created space for it. And now, with Elijah breathing steadily beside her, Rebecca understood that her fight was no longer just about justice, it was about protecting the future that had defied collapse. While Rebecca focused on regaining strength and learning the fragile rhythm of caring for Elijah in the neonatal unit, another crisis was unfolding beyond hospital walls. Financial auditor Harold Benton, hired quietly by Olivia through a corporate accountability contact, began tracing irregularities within Andrew's expanding real estate empire. What initially appeared to be aggressive tax positioning quickly revealed deeper concerns. Several shell companies had transferred large sums into offshore accounts under vague consulting agreements. Cassandra's name surfaced repeatedly within transaction memos coded as brand escalation expenses. Harold, meticulous and unemotional, documented everything with precision. He discovered that Cassandra's hidden gambling debts, owed to discreet but dangerous private lenders, had been quietly covered through Andrew's redirected investment funds. The pattern suggested not isolated indulgence, but systemic concealment. Marcus Green, Andrew's longtime business partner, had grown uneasy months earlier but lacked proof. When Harold presented him with preliminary findings, Marcus faced a moral crossroads. Loyalty to profit or loyalty to truth? Marcus chose disclosure. In a private meeting with Olivia and Daniel Ruiz, he confirmed suspicions that Andrew had authorized several unauthorized transfers without board consent. He admitted noticing Cassandra's influence increasing over financial decisions, especially during the Aspen retreat and subsequent summits. Marcus had once admired Andrew's relentless drive, but he now recognized recklessness disguised as ambition. The company's legal exposure was significant. Investor trust could collapse instantly if mismanagement became public. Daniel expanded the investigation's scope, linking financial misconduct to potential motive in the driveway incident. If Rebecca had not survived, certain asset consolidations would have accelerated under Andrew's sole authority. The implication was chilling. Andrew's ego had not only endangered his marriage, it had endangered the foundation of his empire. Meanwhile, Cassandra sensed tension mounting. Her lenders had begun pressing for repayment more aggressively, unaware that the funding source itself was now under scrutiny. When Andrew received notification of an internal audit review, his initial reaction was indignation. He accused competitors of sabotage and dismissed Marcus's growing distance as paranoia. Yet as legal documents accumulated and board members demanded clarity, his composure began to fracture. The same ambition that once propelled him forward now tightened around him like a vice. Cassandra urged him to maintain confidence publicly, advising strategic deflection. But privately, she confronted him about securing additional funds to cover outstanding debts. The partnership that once thrived on shared ambition began unraveling under pressure. Back at the hospital, Rebecca remained unaware of the full financial storm gathering, though she sensed through Olivia's measured updates that the situation was expanding beyond personal betrayal. She looked at Elijah sleeping peacefully and understood that survival had shifted the narrative. The fall had not destroyed her. Instead, it had exposed everything built on fragile foundations. And those foundations were beginning to crack. The night of the accident was heavy with tension long before the rain began. Andrew and Cassandra had just left a closed-door meeting with legal advisors who warned that financial audits could not be quietly dismissed. Evidence was mounting, and Marcus Green's cooperation with investigators had shifted the balance. Cassandra confronted Andrew in the parking garage beneath his downtown office, her composure cracking under pressure. She had discovered messages suggesting Andrew intended to distance himself from her publicly if Rebecca recovered fully and legal scrutiny intensified. The realization ignited fury. She accused him of planning to discard her once she had served his ambition. Andrew denied betrayal, insisting strategy required adaptability. Their argument escalated inside the car as rain streaked across the windshield. Cassandra's voice trembled not with weakness but with rage at perceived abandonment. Andrew attempted to assert control, but his words sounded hollow. What neither acknowledged aloud was that their alliance had always been transactional. Trust had never been part of the agreement. As they drove onto the expressway, the argument intensified, neither willing to yield. Cassandra gripped the steering wheel tighter when Andrew demanded she calm down. She accused him of laughing while Rebecca bled, of sacrificing everything human for image. The accusation struck deeper than Andrew expected. He lashed back defensively, claiming Cassandra had acted impulsively that night and endangered them both. The exchange spiraled beyond reason. Rain intensified, reducing visibility, but Cassandra's anger drowned caution. She accelerated recklessly, ignoring Andrew's attempt to seize the wheel. The vehicle hydroplaned as they approached a sharp curve. For one split second, both recognized the loss of control. The car collided violently with a concrete barrier, metal twisting under impact. Airbags deployed in explosive bursts, glass shattered, and the sound of crushing steel echoed across the wet highway. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the damage was catastrophic. Cassandra was pronounced dead at the scene, her calculated composure erased in an instant by consequence. Andrew survived, though critically injured. Severe spinal trauma left him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. As he regained consciousness days later in a hospital room far removed from Rebecca's, reality settled with merciless clarity. The woman who once fueled his ambition was gone, and the body that carried his confidence could no longer stand. Investigators quickly linked the accident to the ongoing financial probe and domestic assault case, intensifying legal implications. News outlets reframed the narrative entirely, shifting public sympathy toward Rebecca and exposing layers of concealed misconduct. In the quiet aftermath, Andrew lay immobilized, forced to confront a truth he had long avoided: power without integrity destroys itself. The accident was not random fate. It was the inevitable collision of ego, manipulation, and unchecked ambition. And now, there would be no escape from consequence. The courtroom was silent the morning Rebecca Hale entered to testify. She walked slowly but steadily, still recovering strength, dressed in a simple gray suit that reflected neither triumph nor bitterness. Elijah remained with Judith outside, too young to witness the gravity of justice unfolding. Andrew sat in a wheelchair at the defense table, his once commanding presence diminished but not erased. The paralysis had changed his posture, not the weight of his choices. Media coverage filled the back rows, reporters ready to frame the story as scandal or tragedy. But Rebecca's testimony reshaped it into something else entirely. She described the driveway confrontation with calm precision, no dramatics, no embellishment. She recounted Cassandra's shove, the fall, the blood, and Andrew's frozen reaction. When asked whether she sought vengeance, Rebecca paused briefly before responding. "I seek truth," she said. "And accountability." The statement shifted the tone of the room. This was no longer about spectacle. It was about consequence. Daniel Ruiz presented the security footage and financial findings methodically. Harold Benton's audit revealed asset transfers that painted a pattern of recklessness and concealed intent. Marcus Green testified reluctantly but firmly, admitting that Andrew's decisions had compromised the company's integrity long before the accident. The prosecution argued that while Cassandra's shove initiated physical harm, Andrew's negligence and financial manipulation amplified the damage. The defense attempted to frame events as emotional misjudgment during marital strain, but evidence outweighed rhetoric. Lorraine Cole watched from the gallery, her polished exterior fractured for the first time. The image she had cultivated for her son had unraveled publicly. When Andrew was asked to speak, his voice carried restrained regret. He acknowledged poor decisions but avoided direct moral admission. The courtroom felt less like a battle and more like an unveiling of accumulated truth. The verdict delivered measured consequences. Andrew faced financial penalties, corporate disqualification, and a structured custodial sentence adjusted for his medical condition. The ruling emphasized negligence and fiduciary misconduct while acknowledging Cassandra's fatal role in the physical assault. Rebecca felt no triumph when the gavel struck. Instead, she felt closure beginning to form where chaos once dominated. Outside the courthouse, she declined interviews, choosing privacy over performance. Olivia stood beside her, proud not of victory but of resilience. The legal reckoning had ended publicly, but personal reckoning would continue quietly. Andrew was escorted away not as a titan of industry but as a man confined by his own choices. And Rebecca, holding the future in her arms, stepped into sunlight without anger, only clarity. Justice had not restored what was lost, but it had restored balance. 5 years later, the chapter of survival had transformed into purpose. Rebecca Hale no longer introduced herself as a victim of scandal but as a maternal health reform advocate whose policies were reshaping emergency prenatal protocols across multiple states. The experience that nearly claimed her life had given her clarity rather than bitterness. She worked closely with hospitals to implement early trauma screening procedures for high-risk pregnancies, ensuring no woman felt unheard or dismissed during medical crises. Dr. Leonard Whitmore joined her advisory board, bringing clinical insight shaped by both personal loss and miraculous recovery. Their partnership was rooted not in shared tragedy but in shared responsibility. Olivia Brooks, having built a reputation for principled legal advocacy, successfully ran for district attorney, her campaign centered on accountability without sensationalism. Rebecca supported her quietly, valuing action over applause. Elijah Hale Cole grew into a vibrant child with curious eyes and steady laughter, unaware of the fragile odds that once defined his arrival. In the simple rhythm of school mornings and bedtime stories, Rebecca found peace she once believed unattainable. Andrew Cole's life unfolded in stark contrast. Confined to assisted living with limited public presence, he spent long hours reflecting on decisions that had seemed justified at the time. Physical immobility forced mental confrontation. Lorraine visited regularly, her once sharp demeanor softened by regret she rarely verbalized. Financial penalties and corporate bans ensured that Andrew's empire would never return to former heights. He followed Rebecca's professional achievements through carefully curated news segments, absorbing the irony that the woman he underestimated had built something far more enduring than luxury developments. Cassandra's name faded from headlines, remembered briefly as a catalyst in a cautionary tale about ambition untethered from ethics. Andrew eventually acknowledged privately that his greatest downfall was not the shove, not the accident, not the investigation, but the gradual erosion of empathy. Power had replaced perspective. And without perspective, he had lost everything that mattered. One quiet afternoon, Rebecca visited the Vermont lakeside where Andrew had once proposed years earlier. Elijah played near the water under Thomas's watchful eye, while Judith prepared sandwiches on a picnic blanket. Rebecca felt no lingering anger, only distance from a former version of herself who mistook silence for strength. She had legally protected her inheritance long before marriage through a structured trust her parents advised her to maintain. Andrew had never known the extent of her financial independence. She had never needed his empire to survive. That final revelation remained private, not weaponized. The greatest justice was not destruction, it was transformation. As the sun lowered over the lake, Rebecca understood that survival had not merely preserved her life. It had redefined it. Her story was no longer anchored to betrayal, but to resilience. And in that resilience, she found the truest form of new beginnings. Thank you for listening to Luxurious Tales. If this tale moved you, share it with someone, leave a comment, and let us know what you felt. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time.